details in your head. And I fall victim to that as well. And you have to take a step back and say, what's the timeline, who are the players, what are the points, and then as we mentioned earlier, what's the broader context? And how does this fit in, that there are more and more stories coming up like this? And then distill it down, if you can, maybe a paragraph, but at least a page.
Right. So it comes down to figuring out, in many cases, the different media outlets in your specific city. Now, I'll tell you a little about how it typically works. Typically, in most cities where you live, you'll have one major newspaper daily, you'll have one weekly newspaper, and then you'll have 3, maybe 4 television stations. So what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, and we'll go in depth a little bit more about how you can identify which media outlets are going to be more receptive. And that, in many cases, depends on which media outlets have large investigative units, because typically speaking, when it comes to television, and to be able to bring those images of your loved ones, of your family's story, your advocate story out there into the community, we're going to need pictures, we're going to need video when it comes to television, and newspapers are going to want those pictures as well. In many cases now, video, because newspapers are basically just like television stations when they are coming up with online type of videos. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the ownership groups, about how an affiliate works different than national, and how you can identify which TV stations will be more likely to be able to take in your story and act on it, versus some TV stations which just are not equipped to do that.
And you reminded me, my mother would often say, she's like, honey, reporters want stories. And so it's really about how to approach you in the right way. And so first be succinct, and then be factual. Be factual. So, be truthful. Be very specific. My father would always say specificity. And so strip the story down to the facts. We've been talking a lot about emotions. I'll talk about that in a moment as well. You want to get down to the facts and provide whatever supporting material you can. Now I say the supporting material you can. So that's up to you as to what you can provide and not provide, so you don't jeopardize your case. And consider what additional support, people, data, research, any experts you can call on that can strengthen your story. And be provocative while hitting the heartstrings and balancing emotion and evidence.
Exactly what Teresa is saying, in the sense of the initial pitch to a reporter, especially a television reporter, and I believe as well a newspaper reporter, is going to need to be succinct, because we are getting pitches on so many different types of stories. I do not cover just probate and elder abuse. I cover everything from local government stories to, sometimes I'll have my editors come in and just say, we want you to do some random story about some credit card fraud. And we have to react within minutes and be able to tell an editor at that point, my supervisor, succinctly what is the story within a few minutes. It is equivalent to having to become an expert on a subject within a short period of time. Expert at least enough where somebody learned is going to ask you questions about it, and you have to appear not to be a complete idiot on the subject. That being said, how to approach pitches in many cases devolves down into coming up with why this situation is unique. Because unfortunately, there are so many times whenever we get pages upon pages of documents and evidence and say, pleading to please see my case. More often than not, most reporters will not have that immediate time to look at that case. And then there will be something else. We are basically like that dog in the movie Up, where you remember the balloons and all that stuff, and that dog was like, ooh, squirrel. We're like that. That's, at least I could speak for myself, and especially when it comes to something will always be around the corner a different story that gets our attention immediately and we have to devote 110%. If you are able to reach us, typically speaking, email is the best way, especially on these more complicated stories. And we'll talk a little bit more about the exact pitch and how to really succinctly deliver that. Yes? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. An elevator speech. Yes. Because if there is an email that you send a reporter that has 2 or 3 paragraphs or so of just what is going on and how there are people suffering right now, and in a sense teasing in a sense that there are compelling images and a story that will draw viewers or readers in, then of course have as many cell phone contacts and all that stuff. Please contact me as soon as you can, that type of thing. We'll call you and we'll talk. At that point, do not deluge with data. At that point, talk about the elements, but talk about them in a conversational way. Because the reporter is typically then gauging, what sort of interview am I going to get from this primary contact? There is a person here in this room, Matthew Scarlatos, right over there, who I interviewed and did exactly that. We did a series of stories on his family, and Matt was instrumental in bringing his family's story to our attention through those exact methods. And as you'll see in one of the stories that we'll be playing later on, you'll see what that at least brought out.
So be succinct, be factual, and be responsive. So follow through immediately and understand the type of coverage. So you might have a news piece, or it might be a long lead piece. Either way, follow up right away, because as Nathan mentioned, there's a whole team of, you have other people you need to run the story by and all, and so you need to have that elevator pitch and everything there and tight. And so create, what has been helpful for me is create a Q&A summary sheet for yourself. It's your own cheat sheet of key facts, dates, and because when you're in the middle of it, you may have a senior moment, as you and Linda was talking about earlier. And so you might just forget because you're overwhelmed and you're trying to get the story out, right? So have your cheat sheet, and then most of all, most important, is cultivate a relationship with that local reporter, with the producer. It's not just transactional. You really want to cultivate something that can be a little bit more long-term. Now, I saw a question.
Yeah. I think most of us are here today because we've experienced either corruption, outright corruption, or things that we really suspected were corrupt, things that weren't right in guardianships and probate courts. And as a reporter, I know in my contact with reporters are very hesitant to get involved in anything that's being gone through in a court system. If there's a case entered, I'm sure your legal department tells you to stay as far away. And I've got another question for you, Teresa. I'm 67. What's an RYT? And you've got so many titles by your name. I don't know what 2 of them are.
Okay, I'm like a
DC and RYT. I don't know what they are.
I am a hybrid whole brain, meaning, I'm trained in art and sociology initially, and then I have an MBA from Harvard. And I'm also a registered yoga teacher, so that's the RYT, and also a professional coach. So, and it really is more whole brain, because you need one thing I will share is that in order to fight the darkness, we need the light. And so people often ask, why are you still doing both, power living and elder dignity? And for me, they go hand in hand. You cannot, it's hard to be sustainable in being an advocate unless you have some other practices, yoga, meditation, it might be golf, it might be walking, whatever. whatever it is.
It helps with the frustration, doesn't it? Yeah, it's frustrating to fight these people.
And I certainly am not that flexible, so I should probably get some yoga lessons. That being said, to answer your question regarding courts, you are correct. In many cases, local news outfits are going to be very hesitant to go after specific judges in courts, not because of any sort of fear of an individual judge. It's that it's going to take a large investigative type of outfit to be able to go after a judicial system. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the different types of investigative teams you're going to want to go for. And I'll talk about that briefly right now. Yes?
One question. The courts that we had were all in the chambers of the judge, not in the courtroom. I always thought, man, if we had some news reporters sitting in the courtroom, the outcome would be completely different. And from a news reporter aspect, can you all do that? Do you do it? What's the motivation behind it?
We do sit in the courtrooms sometimes. I can speak on one case, the Scarlato's case, where we sat in the courtroom. My presence was noted as like, oh, there's a reporter here. And I dare say they probably did something different they probably wouldn't have. I'm sure Matt could probably speak a little bit about that. Sure. But that being said, there are 3 different types of television news stations. And newspapers, there are 2 different types as well. Newspapers, the daily newspapers, typically a good one, will have some sort of investigative outlet, at least 1 or 2 reporters that will be focusing on investigations. Weeklies, many times, can actually also do some deeper pieces as well. Don't forget about your local weeklies. They can come up with some good stuff. Television stations, you have 3 types of them. You have one of them who doesn't give a darn about investigations. They basically just do the news of the day, and they will cover whatever happens that day, and they typically will not do many investigations. That, in many cases, could be a successful business model. Here in the DC market, Fox 5 is a Fox-owned station, owned and operated. They are typically that model. They don't particularly have an investigative team. Then you have TV stations that are more focused on consumer-style reports, where they will do what they call our investigations, but typically speaking, they are stations, those reporters are tasked with the troubleshooting type of reports. Somebody's been scammed, they will do a quick thing where they'll contact that person, the business person who maybe scammed that person, they'll get things fixed, they'll call it an investigation. And it looks great on TV, don't get me wrong, you get like the pieces wrong, you scammed this person. And, I bet you if you looked at your local TV stations at your home right now, you will know that station that does that type of thing. You're all probably thinking about channel numbers like, oh yeah, channel 13 does that. It happens. And then there are some stations that are either hybrid or will do harder investigations. In smaller markets, in smaller smaller cities, those are few and far between, unfortunately. Here in the DC area, right now, it's typically Channel 4, the NBC owned and operated station, and Channel 9 is actually coming up with it. Channel 7 right now is a bit of a hybrid situation where it does both consumer and tries to do some hard investigations, although they are scaling down on it quite a bit. That's a whole other story. That's my station. Now, there are different outfits, and the way you can tell, typically, when you're kind of shopping for a television station to tell your story, go to their website, look to see if investigations are there on the front page. If there is a tag that says I-Team or investigations, that's probably the station you want to go for. If there's nothing saying investigations or I-Team, skip that station. They're not going to take your story. They're just not. So if you find something with a tag of I-Team or investigations, look at their bios, or look at how big the team is. If it's just one person, if it's like some sort of like Ask Nathan or Nathan the Troubleshooter, that's not the station you want to go for. They're those type of consumer reporter type of things, where they're going to go, find a scam and they're going to fix it, but a very small, minor thing. They won't be able to take your story. They won't be able to ingest it in. Because that reporter is doing like one of those reports every day, and they are not going to take the time. Yes?
tell me if you ever encountered something like this. Was the courts had an administrative hearing on rules, okay, and we were contesting one of the rule changes allowed them to just appoint experts endlessly to the case until there's no money, okay, and we wanted limits on it, and so we invited television stations to come to the thing, and we didn't know how to select anything like what you've just done, so we just invited everybody, and one guy said, "Oh yeah, for sure we're going to be there, no doubt about it," and nobody showed up, and so then I called the guy up and I asked him, and he said, "Oh, we got a call from the presiding judge saying you don't want to cover this story. Don't come down here."
That's strange. That station shouldn't have done that. Yeah, exactly.
So I mean,
if I got a call like that, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, okay, sure." Then I'm totally going with 2 cameras.
the courts had a rule that said that you have to inform them 48 hours in advance before you come down here and tape. So we were following their rule, not knowing that that's contrary to statute.
Right,
They're making up their own rules.
Each state, you'll also have to be aware of what states allow cameras in the court. When I came in here from Ohio, okay, so I've been in California, Las Vegas, Ohio, Columbus, and here. So in Palm Springs, California, you can bring a camera wherever the heck you want. Las Vegas, like, you start to drink with the judges, it was crazy. I mean, you do whatever you wanted. I mean, like, you just go in judges' chambers. I still have some of the phone numbers for the judges, it was crazy. Anything went there. Columbus, you had to like ask for permission for the court cameras and all that stuff. It's like, okay. And then here in like Virginia, you can't even bring a camera in there. You're like, what the heck? As we found out with the Scarlet, I mean, I knew that from before. I mean, I can't even bring a cell phone in those courts. Like, what the heck? Maryland's a little better, but not by much.
So you can't bring camera in the court. Indoors and some of them you can't. You can in Fairfax.
Yeah, Capitol Hill.
They're afraid.
Well, Capitol Hill, like setting up an event is one thing, but I mean, you can always have some sort of event right there on the lawn. There's like, kind of free speaking areas and whatnot. And then, of course, invite anybody to cover it. I should let Teresa get back to your speaking.
Well, yeah, it's all helpful information. And so, what do we have so far? Be succinct, be factual, be responsive, and be resourceful. And so you want to create your own media. And as you'll see, in a minute, that's what actually got me started in my aunt's case and got some media interest because I filmed my aunt 1 month before she was abducted. And I put it up on a website. It caused a lot of fuss with the court, and they tried to get rid of me, tried to take down the site, a lot of different things. But and so remember that all media, like Nathan said at the beginning, all media is visual, except for maybe a podcast or radio. But even there, you need promotional images. And so capture relevant media yourself on your cell phone. You want to also, in anticipation of perhaps a long lead story, you want to document your own journey. I'm doing some of that, for something that's long lead. And be organized in terms of accessing the footage as well. So I have a separate hard drive that has everything on it. It's backed up, so if someone says, I need a clip or I need an image, I can go right to it. Again, you want to be responsive, so you don't want to be looking around your computer for the footage. And then leverage social media. Oftentimes, the mass media will look at those feeds for leads and also for traction. And so, get out there with Twitter and with Facebook and all. Now, I did that early on with my aunt. They tried to say I was doing advertising of my aunt and tried to, shut me down in that way. I didn't go away.
Yeah, exactly what Teresa's saying. availability of media is so important because my editors are going to be asking immediately, what pictures do we have? What video do we have? And the same thing goes for newspapers as well. They are going to be asking for what availability of pictures. And typically speaking, especially in these type of cases of elder abuse, of probate court, of guardianship, we cannot get that video independently because of just the way that the law is. I mean, if you can't visit your loved one, we sure as heck aren't going to be able to. And so that video, those pictures are going to be so vital. And not just video and pictures from the present day, but from the past as well. Because we need to be able to show this a family story. And a family story is not just the pain of the present, it is the joy of the past. Yes?
When it comes to documentation, video, media, and things like that, I mean, is it that you only want to provide enough to whet their appetite? I have 6 terabytes of documentation of what they did to my sister. Video, pictures, audio. In Virginia, it's a one-party state, so you can gather all of that type of information. But it's with that magnitude of information, what specific things should you pinpoint?
There are 4 different types of television stories, in a sense, when it comes to the time going into it. And newspaper stories are similar. There is the day turn, and the day turn is the story that you don't want. That is the story, basically, a reporter gets an assignment at 9 a.m., maybe 10 a.m., and they have to turn a story by 5 p.m. You do not want that for your case. So if some reporter's like, oh yeah, I'll do your story, and can you meet me at noon, and this will be on at 5. Whoa, no, because that story's just going to be like just a quick, it's not going to be good.
Okay.
It's just going to, they're not going to be able to do a good job.
Okay.
The second type of story is typically maybe like a story that, like, if you get into an investigative unit, getting your attention, there are 3 different types of stories in that aspect. There's one which is the, hey, I'll spend a little bit of time. This might take about a week or so of the reporter's time, of like maybe 2 or 3 different types of interviews, and it will be a story that an investigative reporter will be wanting to put it into their slot for, they have to do like once or twice a month type of story. So it's going to be your 3-minute long piece, which in television is an eternity. Which 3 minutes, that's not much, but in television, believe me, a good television reporter can tell a darn good story in 3 minutes. And then there's the longer piece, which is like, it's called a ratings piece or sweeps piece. The little secret of television, locally at least, is that there are 3, almost 4 months where big stories come out. If you get approached before the months of February, May, or November, those are the 3 months that all TV stations basically put out all the bells and whistles and try to get all their ratings, because those are the 3 months, February, May, and November, that are counted by Nielsen, which is the company that basically counts viewers. So you'll start getting a lot of curiosity from reporters in the months of January, April, and October, or sometimes a little bit beforehand, because those reporters are thinking, what are my big, giant pieces that I need to present to my bosses? It's like, this is a big story I've got. I've got this big story about how the entire probate court system is broken, or about this terrible case of elder abuse. Okay, so they have those meetings about a month or 2 beforehand, they hash it out, and they figure out what stories are going to have big promotion. Because a reporter, if you could somehow, if a reporter believes that your story has enough legs to be able to like carry through with promotion, they have to fill those slots anyways. And if it's your story, they're going to love you. And then the 4th bigger story is something that like they can develop a franchise on, in a sense. There are some TV stations, I know for instance KTNV in Las Vegas, Channel 13, I knew a reporter there that basically did a lot of those types of stories. Those are bread and butter. She did probably about a story, like an elder abuse story, a few times a month.
That's Darcy?
Darcy Spears, yes. I work for the competing station in Las Vegas, in KLAS. You know what? The good and the bad of that is that, on one hand, Darcy Spears had a complete angle. She owned that story. It meant, though, as a competing reporter, I didn't dare touch it.
Right.
I did other stories.
Right.
So it was both good and bad. Sometimes you get a reporter that owns a story so much, it scares off the other reporters, and they just decide, I'm not going to touch it. She's got this. So credit to Darcy. Yes?
The system, I'm trying to understand it a little bit. Number one, you're the one that has to look at it first when we go approach a media? Or do we go and approach, how is the process to approach the media through the channel, the political level of the media?
So the pitch to the individual reporter is the best way to do it. In fact, I was just talking to somebody right here in this room who was saying that hey, I contacted your station and I had a bunch of documents and I had a bunch of information and you guys didn't get back to me. I'm like, wait, who'd you contact? Find out that, yeah, our station has a whole entire unit that's mostly focused on consumer stuff. It's like the call for action group. We advertise the heck out of it. But there was a bunch of volunteers, usually retired volunteers, who are taking the phones and they hear this super complicated story and they realize, there's nothing we can do about it. Sometimes they will send that information along to us. And we've been talking, WJLA has been talking, the investigative unit has been talking to like the call for action folks, which is kind of like a subcontract in the sense that, hey, we need more of these stories that come across this way. And so there's a little bit of tension on that. So in other words, there was probably a pretty good story that just completely got lost. Lucky for Matt, Scarlato's over here, contacted me directly. I'm trying to remember, Matt, did you contact me directly or was it through I think maybe
It was
Rick.
it was through Rick.
Rick
Black.
Yeah, over at CEAR.
But you have to go and sell the story to your people in order
Yes.
to get that. So
Yes. I have to take that pitch. I have to believe it, and then once I believe it, like believe that, not just believe it, like just as far as credibility, but just believe that I can shepherd this story along and make it into some sort of television piece for 2 or 3 minutes. And if you convince me on that, chances are I can go to my bosses and convince them of that. There's a supervisor beyond that. If my supervisor says yes, it's good, at the very least it clears the hurdle to make it into a story. And then if the news director above that and the promotions people above that believe it's a good story, then you bought yourself an extra 2 or 3 times of this story getting on air.
So if you go to them first, will they come down to you and tell you to do the story, or no?
Rarely. Typically
Rarely.
speaking, if you go directly, you can't really go directly to a news director and have that because they've got so much stuff going on. They're not really taking that in. If you want the right way to get, especially for these type of stories, go directly to the investigative reporter.
Okay.
Email the investigative reporter directly.
And so you see, it is this process, and you can be strategic in how you approach it. So let me see if I remember the 5. Be succinct, be factual, be responsive, be resourceful, and then be ready. So be prepared to go public. And then, there are a lot of issues, good and bad, in this, and attorneys for the media outlet may vet you, particularly if it's a long lead story. So don't take offense. They want to see if there's a real story there. And so their legal team, may be asking some questions and looking at some documentation. The reporter, if it's a good reporter, will speak to the other side and get a balanced, view. And so those attorneys may try to shut you down. That happened. I've worked for months on an AARP story with a very good journalist, and right at the very end, it was killed in legal. And then another story, they had to slot in, and so you can invest a lot of time, but know that can happen, and your adversaries may threaten you and try to issue sanctions and gag orders like they did for me. They were just simply trying to get me to go away, but because I wasn't a party to the case, it was a little harder. But they did threaten my mother, and that became one of the reasons why you can't see your sister, because your daughter is speaking to the media. And then when the story is released, be prepared to receive the calls and respond to calls and emails and comments. And there might be comments from plants from the other side also. And so just, be prepared for that. If you're on the side of truth, then go for it. But weigh these, consequences.
I have a colleague, actually, she's on our research team, who did her dissertation on childhood identity theft by a parent. And she's gotten so much media attention. She even has an agent now. And so, I don't know what you think about that strategy, but she's, oh man, she's just finishing a book and has gotten on national TV shows and all kinds of things.
It can spiral in a good way, and you do need to be strategic. Actually, in a moment, we'll go into opportunities and risks. So I'm going to hold that comment until Nathan weighs in.
Well, exactly on your point, because not only immediately after we contact, your side, yes, we are going to contact the other side. Many times they do not want to talk. There will be times where they're like, nope, we have no comment, whether or not it's in litigation or not, they will not want to talk. Frankly, you actually want that to happen. Because if that's the case, then it just means that there's going to be less time that's spent on the stories. Like, oh, they didn't have any comment. And then usually after that, the editor or the supervisor will ask the reporter, could you get some sort of expert opinion on this? So, for instance, I'll be contacting Rick Black for CEAR, or I'll be contacting other folks. In one of the stories about elder abuse, we went to the OIG because they did a report on basically like how they have no clue how many probate cases are in the country and guardianship cases. And so I read that report, went to OIG, like, hey, could you talk about this? Like, yeah, sure, we can talk about the report. Oh, Office of Inspector General, the U.S. OIG. And so yeah, we'll typically, because then the editor, the supervisor will be asking, how is this a wider story? We want to make this beyond just what this family fight. So typically speaking, then we'll get a third-party person to talk, and at that point, that's a good expert to have, whether or not it's that, the friend of yours that you talked about is that perfect type of expert. There are other experts out there that we contacted as well. So, so have your advocate friends feed these expert contact information to reporters, whether or not it's directly from you or whether or not it's directly from somebody else. For instance, whenever I was doing the story on the Scarlatta's family, it was Rick Black in many cases at CEAR who was kind of sending experts my way, and it was great, and contact information. And those experts were like, yeah, this is going on all over the country. Let's talk about it.
And that adds to credibility in terms of your story, to surround your story with these experts.
I have a question for Nathan. Since we're dealing with such a legal problem here, and we're going to be dealing against your legal department in the media, can you explain to us how we can, because you could take on the story, because we've had numerous reporters want to take on the story. Then it gets to be legal, and it gets squashed. How do we put it together in the proper perspective that you're able to get it sold through media? Because what we're here today is, how do we get this information out? And if we're going to get squashed by legal media all the time, we need some insight in how we can put our stories together properly to not get squashed by legal media.
The best protection is to have legal filings on your own behalf. Because typically speaking, the attorneys, the TV station attorneys, and I assume the newspaper attorneys, are going to be, well, okay, do we have some legal language within a declaration or within some sort of filing or hearing that we could use? Because then that allows an attorney for a media outlet is always afraid of he said, she said, in effect. They're afraid of that. And also an editor is going to be afraid of that. So typically speaking, a news outfit will be very hesitant to start covering a family elder abuse type of dispute until it has gone into the legal process. Until the news station is then able to be like, this piece of paper here, and start zooming in on words. The minute that a news station can do that, the news station feels protected. And the attorney, and then I'm able to go to the attorney and basically be like, I'm just reporting what's in the legal documents, we're protected. And then it calms them down, more often than not.
The only problem is the other side has fabricated hearsay and gets away with it. So the fact of it is, when you come in with the actual real facts, and they on the other side comes in with all their hearsay, then that would blow that whole argument right there. How do we make sure we get through this?
Okay, well, let me just say something. Don't dump everything on these people that they're expected to solve it, number one, I am.
I want
And
to be
number
inside.
two, you do have social media. You like Doug Pranks, he created his own website. He's been teaching Roger Hilligus. You have social media, and I'm talking from the PR end. I also will reiterate the fact that from an ethical standpoint, you can work with some of us who are communicators and we understand what the reporters have to do. The PR people are going to work with you to make sure the facts are there, and we're also going to get them information before it goes to court, as we're talking here to get to the root of the problem and to look for solutions. And we shouldn't just have to expect them to air dirty laundry from the court in the news.
And that actually goes to the next slide of opportunity. Oh, you have another question? Okay.
Yeah, I was just interested in what you mentioned that you went to the ARP. I actually went there first just because I really got to know where So I went to the ARP in a whole different ways. And finally it did get, again, I'm not not in the journalism field, but like you said, I had to have it boiled down.
Right. Well, we had the story pretty much finished, but their legal side came down and threatened, and I guess the other legal side, the ARP legal side, decided not to go with it. So it was a different. Right.
And they actually hired a journalist.
So that's the point. That's the twist you've got to have.
And they did go to the other attorneys. They said no comment. It was good. They tried to go to one of the star physicians, a reputable physician, that, the case was done. My mom was passed.
Well, that's the other point that's important then in your situation, that the case is done. It's easier to report on something that is closed than ongoing.
So now, this was because AARP has the bulletin and the magazine. The magazine only comes out 6 times a year. So we were actually ready to go in October, last October, but got pushed out. And I don't say this in a bad way, but we got pushed out for the babysitter, right? Because that was huge. The lady went to jail. We don't have that situation. I mean, my mom's gone. It's already 6 years old. And the editor says to us, it's still there. It's like, and I said, just tell us if it's not going to go in, it's not going to go in.
Right.
I think it went to the legal. I know they asked for legal input, like their lawyers to look it over and say, is this legitimate?
Right, and because they wanted to see, are we on the
He's
good
not
side?
He's not shutting us down. He's not saying, look, you're not going to do it. This other story has just overshadowed everything. And I called and I reminded and met him, and so I think I have to push it in the relationship, but it's hard not to get discouraged.
Well, keep going with building that relationship. I got the 5-minute warning. So actually what I want to do is do the next 2 slides, and we're going to give some examples, and then we'll come back to questions, just so we can, because some of the examples might answer your question. So opportunity and risk. We've already talked about some of them. Be intentional.
Definitely.
This is key. Be intentional to optimize the opportunities and minimize the risk. So, look for tie-ins, to something that is timely, and I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Be mindful of what you give to reporters, and make sure that it won't jeopardize your loved one's safety, your family, or the legal case. So, and that will be up to you to be your own advocate. And then note that there is always a risk, not with this reporter, but that they may not get the facts right or may want to sensationalize, and that's why, to Nathan's point, you really want to choose the outlets carefully that you go to. And then the three tactics to get started: create a website, so there is some place you can send everyone, really, the media outlets and others, for more. Build your list locally. So you start locally in terms of the media, and then send out press releases. If something significant happens, then you might not get the story pickup initially, but someone will say, "Wow, okay, I heard that," and then you might get a call. And so I want to give a few print and online examples, and then Nathan will give some TV examples. And so this, I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because I've already mentioned. So I captured video 1 month before my aunt was abducted and put it on elderdignity.org. And then I continued posting videos even though they were threatening me. Actually, in fact, I stepped up the posting after they started threatening me. And then I got a little more provocative with facts, and so I wrote the Huffington Post article, "Is Elder Guardianship a New Form of Human Trafficking?" That's how I connected with Sam Sugar and Rick Black and Tom Wright, and all of these advocates called me. And I tied it in. I'd moderated at the UN, and so I tied it in with the opening of the General Assembly. So it was a very specific timing. And then when the elections were coming up, this is another example of strategic tie-ins where I said, okay, in Florida is a hot spot for guardianship, for involuntary guardianships. It's also a battleground state, and many seniors are being stripped of their right to vote. And so I asked some questions in the article, like, what's the correlation here? Is there any? And what's the data on it? And then that led to being able to leverage podcasts to expand the advocacy. And then Diane Diamond did more in-depth coverage of my aunt's story. And then many of you have a handout. I just created this last week in thinking about how to provide the broader context in a one-pager, and then on the other side do a case study. And if you want to use that template, email me. If you want to use the template of the front side and then put your own case study on the back side, I will allow you to use those the design files. And then the last one is this piece, Deception of Protection, which I'm releasing in about a week. It's a 22-minute video that will provide an overview on involuntary guardianships. And Rick Black and Dr. Sugar are prominently, in the piece in explaining how this happens. So that's another example of putting out your own media, so we can begin to educate people on the broader context.
And I've aired some pieces, but we're running a little low on time, so certainly I know, yes, they are online, and Linda can certainly send maybe some links or what have you, but long story short, we're here to answer